This year, our students will be participating in virtual science fairs at both the regional and DVSF levels. Can you tell us about one of your, if you kind of extrapolate back, one of your high school projects or junior high projects, and how you might adapt that research to participate in a virtual science fair?
Yeah, so I did math projects, and with math projects, you always have this difficulty of like, how do you explain it? Because often they're very technical, and often even the question you're asking is very technical. And so I was, one of the projects I worked on was on random matrices. And you know, this, like a technical audience, okay, you probably have some, you probably, maybe have heard of a matrix, maybe know a little bit of linear algebra. Some of you probably know more than that. But you know, you really got to build that up. In any kind of, whether virtual or in person, in any kind of math project, you have to sort of build up, okay, here's why this question is interesting, and here's why, you know, my work is interesting, and so on. And so in some ways, like, some of that is easier in a virtual format, because you really can, in a talk, you can get across some of the subtlety that's harder to, you know, put in words on a poster. But the problem is that you can't, if you're sort of recording a presentation, you don't get to get the sort of feedback of how much does this person already understand, and, you know, help them, you know, you can sort of skip ahead if they already know things, or slow down. And so I think that's really what I would focus on, is figuring out how to present the work in a way that anyone who is at any level, whether they, you know, barely went beyond high school in math, or whether they have a, you know, math PhD, but maybe aren't an expert in your field, how, you know, to make sure that any of those people can sort of find the right way in, and figure out how to structure your submission so that it's understandable to all of those people. Because if they can't understand sort of the context for your work, they're not going to understand your work, and they're not going to understand why they should care about your work. So that's really what I would focus on, is how to make sure that different people can jump in.
Reflecting back on your projects or your experience, if you were to conduct that today and have to present your project in a virtual setting, do you have any thoughts on what kind of adaptations you might make, you know, how you might get across your key points in a virtual setting as opposed to in-person judging? And the question asks, how will the science fair work in the virtual environment? I'm sure that DVSF will have information on the logistics and workings of the virtual fair. But just as, you know, reflecting back panel, as in your experience, anything that you would adapt for a virtual setting? Maybe starting, with Lucy.
Sure. One thing that I think is really neat, I'm a part of multiple different professional societies, and going to those different meetings, there's always one opportunity that's really neat. It's like the elevator talk, and you have to be able to distill your research into, as Tasha was saying, to a level that everybody can understand, and also be able to talk about it in a very short amount of time, and then virtually. So I think kind of thinking about it like that as something that I know in ISEF, we would always have the public day, which they would bus all kids from all over the city in, and you'd be talking about high level research with, you know, PhDs and MDs one moment, and then the next, or on Wednesday for judging day, and then the next day you're talking with kindergartners, and like, how do you do that? So I think that the elevator speech is really a neat way to think about it. It's not, oh wow, I don't get to interact with the judges as much anymore, but how can I perfect my research perfectly? I know for judging day, I would always, you know, have to go through my presentation a few times before it was just right. But to be able to do that, and then be able to have that perfect, well-rehearsed knowledge of what you want to share, I think that's a cool way to think about it.
That's, yeah, an incredibly important skill, to be able to summarize and get the key points across. Nice. Tejal, any thoughts just on what you would think in a virtual fair?
I think it's actually a very interesting, timely predicament per se. I don't think it's actually a problem. I think I actually see it as like a pretty strong opportunity. I know we're used to, having a nice trifold poster board and coming up with as imaginative or as visual posters as we could. But in this setting, like right before this meeting, I came off like a 2-hour pitch meeting with higher ups in my group, and that was on Zoom, and that was done on a virtual setting. And you'd be surprised how many people don't get the experience, whether it's talking in front of a group of people on Zoom, whether that's presenting a poster presentation, or even just talking about your work, and how many people will go through high school, college, even professional school and never get a chance of doing that. So it's a unique area where, you try to really build a story, and how can you, basically share what's up in here and what's on the presentation with everyone else. But it's a great place to, trial and error and gain that experience, I believe.
Nice. Milland, anything to add on the virtual setting?
Yeah, so I guess this will depend on the specific format that different science fairs or DVSF in particular take on. But one thing that comes to mind is that I guess like at every science fair I did in high school, at least one judge would have a question that surprised me, or that I hadn't necessarily planned for. And I guess if the opportunity for interaction with the judges is reduced or more difficult, or for like a back and forth with the judges is a little harder virtually, I think there maybe is a bigger emphasis, I guess, on getting feedback from more people beforehand to kind of get a sense of what some reactions might be, I guess. If maybe you won't have time to respond, like go back and forth with judges as many times for whatever reason. But again, this will depend on, I guess, the specifics of the format, but that's maybe something I would keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a really nice suggestion, interesting insight. Thank you. Ellen, I'm thinking maybe you'll need a revision 2 of the book to deal with success in the virtual setting, but any thoughts?
Yeah, so I gave a talk at a society meeting this summer, so I had to pre-record the talk, which was actually not as bad as I thought, because I could, record a couple slides at a time, and if I messed one up, I went back and I did it again. It's a little odd not speaking to somebody face to face. There's not as much eye contact and things like that. I didn't figure this out in time for my talk then, but apparently there's a way to superimpose a little picture of yourself on the PowerPoint slide so that people can, I still need to learn how to do this. Maybe you guys can teach me, but like so that they can look at your slides and then see you describing what you did, and maybe even to have some kind of like whiteboard function. Or I would just say, the guidelines for the science fair presentation are also the same as kind of like when I give talks now or give people feedback on talks now, which is to keep the slides really simple. The audience can only look at one place at a time. So, make sure they know what they should be looking at when you're talking about it, just like you would point to a specific part on the board. My mentor, Leslie Vosshall at Rockefeller, she teaches us to put the conclusion of the slide at the top of the slide, so that people can, if they space out for a second, they can get back on board. Hopefully everybody will be listening, following as closely as they can, but it does happen, right? The other thing is, one thing I learned in my science fair days, but now it's just been drilled into my brain now. I remember specifically one of my projects, I felt it had a really exciting conclusion, and sometimes I would present it and I would save that conclusion for the end. And since then I've learned that it's better to tell people up front, don't keep the talk as a mystery story, just tell them like, I found this really cool thing and I'm gonna tell you now how I got there. But then they have motivation to keep listening. So in the lab that I work in, we call that bluff, bottom line up front. I would say if the presentations are, I can't imagine they're going to be that much longer than 15 minutes. Maybe they're even a lot shorter. So you probably have to pick one or two big points that you want the audience to take home from your talk. And then, you know, enough background to get there. I always thought the logbook was a really important part of the process, and you know, kind of like the raw data. So I think it's a fun opportunity to, you know, use pictures, use videos that you couldn't use that easily in person. I would like to see, you know, I always like when people give talks for them to walk me through the graphs and the actual data and tell me, why do you think this is different? Or how do you know, what were your controls? I like to engage with people on the data. So I would say that's, I think, the heart of the research. So I would encourage people to, you know, show us your data and tell us how you got it and what it means.